Tonight we have a very interesting program. We have John Mora as the moderator. John is Chief Data Scientist at Zephyr. It's a video company that delivers contextual targeting for brands on YouTube for more effective marketing campaigns. I'm hoping I got that right. John Mora gave a fascinating presentation in 2018 on becoming a data-first organization. And he talked about the key role that data science plays in digital transformation. He brought us some real world stories of what organizations go through to get to that goal. And so we wanted to invite him back, and we have some very distinguished panelists along with John tonight, each of who is an expert on various dimensions of data science. So I would like at this point to turn it over to John and take it from there, please.
Sure. Hi, thanks so much for having me. So I'm here to lead the panel, and then basically the way that this is going to go down is myself, John Bardo from Microsoft, Lisa Gwynn from Oracle, and Shelly Wright from Kaiser Permanente. We're all going to do roughly 10 minutes about what this topic means to us, and then we're going to go through a guided Q&A session and then leave an informal Q&A session from the audience to the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Just a little bit about myself. So my name is John Moore. I work at Zephyr, and Zephyr, as Roger alluded to, is a video ad tech company. Basically, what we're trying to do is our clients are brands and agencies, and we're trying to express their opinions about content on YouTube, on Facebook, on other video platforms. So whether they want to be around it, like sports or cooking, or away from it, like adult content or weapons, that's kind of what we do. In this role, I oversee a team of data scientists and machine learning engineers who are really responsible for actioning upon this and the scale of tens of millions to hundreds of millions of decisions a day. Prior to this role, I was the director of data science at eHarmony, where I oversaw algorithmic matchmaking, dynamic pricing, fraud modeling, and churn modeling. I had my own business doing machine learning methods in radiation oncology, and I have a doctorate from UCLA in biomedical engineering focused on subcortical segmentation of brain MRI using machine learning, and an undergrad also in biomedical engineering from Johns Hopkins. So what I'm going to talk about today are what I view as successful data and data science projects. So I view three things as kind of key here, and this is similar to the talk I gave in 18 with some key differences. The first is alignment, right? This is alignment both between people like me who manage a data science team down to the individual data scientists, but also from me up to the business, right? Are we solving the right problem? The next thing, and this is, gets a lot of play, this kind of thing, this culture of failure, but I think it's doubly important in a research discipline like data science. And the last and kind of self-evident one is talent. You have to have not only bright people, but the right mix of people. So let's start with alignment. So no mystery here. Data science problems are incredibly hard, right? One can still get a PhD in lots of sub-disciplines having to do with data science, everything from audio processing, image processing, video, text understanding, the world's your oyster here. In academia, one of the things that's not usually talked about is why is the problem we're solving important to a particular business? But in my experience, this is always a fundamental question that people frequently forget to ask. So the analogy I like to use is an oracle, and not in the sense of the company, but in the ancient Greek sense of a perfect predictor. A challenge I always issue to myself, and that I issue up the chain as well, is if I developed a perfect model that never made a mistake, how much value would I bring to my entity? Business, nonprofit, what have you. If the answer is not a lot, we're probably not solving the right problem. To give you an idea of where this has come to bear in my career is at eHarmony. A lot of what I was focused on is a model that did 7-day two-way communication, right? So given two people that matched, would person one talk to person two and person two talk to person one, all within 7 days of that match existing. And our hypothesis was that if the answer was yes, then that would be good for the company. Now, we did lots to validate this. For instance, we validated that if we got too good, did we lose business because people left the platform? And we had customer success and product teams that said, no, this was worth its weight in gold in advertising, word of mouth advertising. And we also went the other way and analyzed a lot of our customer support logs and said, a lot of the reason people are saying they're leaving the product, if they're leaving, is because the match quality is not good, right? And so basically what that does is it constantly reaffirms that while this eHarmony is not a hedge fund, for instance, where one is saying make the most money, that's literally what data science does in a hedge fund, right? It's still really important that the problem we're solving does transition well to the value of the business, right? The next thing I want to talk about is this culture of failure. So failure should be celebrated. One of the ways that I like to communicate this to my team is that I say, I will never give you a demerit for a failed experiment. However, I do require non-overlapping fast failures, right? So it's no problem if you have ideas that seem reasonable that don't work out and they're all different, more power to you, great, because eventually we'll find the right answer. But in order to facilitate this culture, we make use of a lot of modern tools, Metaflow, data version control, and weights and biases, which is a paid solution. Actually are some of the tools that we've integrated in the last 6 months at Zephyr that have really helped with experiment tracking. This is a new subdomain in commercial data science where people can register data sets, hyperparameters, algorithms, what have you, and register results. So that means that there is a single archive where this is done, and you can get this situation where experiments aren't repeated every 3 months, 6 months, year with the same results. Now we take this so far that one of the problems that we work with at Zephyr deals with highly unbalanced data. In fact, I could argue all of them do, right? For instance, our clients are interested in detecting adult content, for instance, nudity and the like on YouTube. Most of the videos on YouTube, and dare I would say almost all, have nothing to do with nudity. However, a very small amount do, and they're very important in the eyes of our customers, finding them so that they can not target them in their advertising campaign. This is akin to finding a needle in a haystack, right? In data science, we say this is unbalanced data. Now, the director of data science on my team wanted to spend some time to say, hey, can we debias our models? And I'm not going to get into all the math here, but there is a lot of math here. Basically, we wanted to say, how sure are we that our models work on the actual distribution of YouTube instead of the distribution that we got labeled? He went so far as to contact academics in the space and read papers, attend conferences. And after 2 months, he basically threw his hands up and said, I've tried so many experiments and can't figure it out. Instead of burying our head in the sand, we actually presented it jointly to the whole tech org. And we started and ended by saying, this didn't work. Here's what we tried. Here's why we tried it. And here's why we think it didn't work. And at the end of the day, that was applauded. So really having that ability to go up in front of the org and talk like that is crucial because this is how good ideas flourish. So the last thing that I'll touch on is appropriate talent. So this is a slide that I presented in 2018 along with Jesse Steinweg Woods that kind of breaks down data engineering, data science, BI into 4 different kind of disciplines, what are called data engineer, data scientist type B, data scientist type A, and data analyst. And I think what's really cool is the different tools that one needs to be good at this kind of hasn't changed that much. However, the naming certainly has. So data engineer actually has proliferated and kind of stayed, that's still a very common title you'll see in industry. But when I go and hire data scientist type B, there's actually more modern names that we find, such as ML engineer or ML ops. This is an emerging sub-discipline within machine learning. That's how do you build tools, and for instance, some of the tools we talked about before, Metaflow or data version control, such that you enable quick experiments, quick inference, that kind of stuff. We'll see data scientist or applied researcher, usually in the data science type A, and these are the people who actually go out and build models, right? And finally, for data analyst, we also see BI analyst. They're the ones who make, kind of gross as opposed to fine predictions and usually report on what happened in the past. Now, one piece of advice that I want to leave with in the last minute is a recent experience I had at Zephyr where we hired a consulting firm. And we hired a consulting firm to do these first 2. We really wanted to kind of beef up our data infrastructure. And I found this to be extremely successful, right? This is akin to building pipes. And it's not to say that this work is not hard. It certainly is, and I would never allude that it's not. However, it is more well understood, right? There exists a set of tools, there exists documentation, we implement them, we run into, well understood problems and we find solutions. So I have had success not only recently, but in the past using consultants for this. This is antithetical or opposite, I would say, from the other 2 disciplines. where I have had negative experiences outsourcing this. And this is, and your mileage will vary, but in my experience, doing data science is so, you have to dig into the data so deeply and be like so into, hey, this one field feels a little off, and like pull on that string over and over and over again to get the best data before you get the best models. And the compensation structure for consultants usually doesn't lend itself to people doing that. So in my experience, and again, your mileage will vary, I tend to really not outsource data scientists, but I will outsource data engineers or ML engineers when the opportunity arises. Needless to say, at Zephyr, we do have all these disciplines, but that's how I can scale my team quickly. So that's it for me on how, a little overview of transitioning to a data first culture. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Bardo and let him introduce himself. John, take it away.
Thank you, John. Can you go ahead and flip the slide? Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I'll be on video in just a minute and I'll tell you why I'm not there when I get there. So first of all, I always like to use this slide as an introduction to myself. I use it for three purposes, particularly since COVID struck. The first purpose is really to kind of introduce myself. I'm a healthcare evangelist at Microsoft. What that means is that I'm actually a recovering CIO from a hospital, and I'm here at Microsoft helping people understand, first of all, how our technologies support issues that need resolved in healthcare, but also to help our product organizations understand where we might need to tweak our technologies to make them fit into healthcare better. So the first exercise on this slide is really the introduction. The second piece I like to tell people is this slide itself was designed using analytics. What I did is I took a picture, put it on a slide, put a couple words out there, and ultimately what it did is it went into a data bank, and anybody that's ever used PowerPoint can use this nowadays. It went into a data bank of how would the great marketers of the world present a slide piece of material based on the kinds of data I gave it. And as I've said before, I'm a CIO in a hospital. I was a CIO in a hospital. I'm not a great marketing person, so I need this kind of analytics to help me drive along. And then for the third reason why I do it, I'll actually start my video and you'll see a floating head and you'll see the net effects of COVID that have happened to me. So I sense that I'm a genuinely good looking guy right now, but I guess I might've been better looking before COVID hit. And as soon as I start traveling, visiting clients, I'll take this off and I'll be back to looking similar to that guy in the picture. So if you'll go forward for me, John, I just wanted to give an introduction there. What we know for a fact is that in all industries, and becoming more so in healthcare, is that data drives personalized experiences. The example I'm giving you here is if I'm a person that needs to go to see a doctor or an emergency room, what I typically did in the past is I'd look up and figure out which emergency room was the closest, and that's where I'd drive to. But now we're starting to see that data can drive us to where we'd want to go, similar to the way Uber's used or those types of things in other industries. What you can see in this example is that the nearest organization, the nearest emergency room to myself is really just a short distance. It's only a 6-minute drive away. But if I go there, I have an estimated wait time in the ED of 25 minutes. So I've got a total out time of 31 minutes before I get to actually see a doctor, to get to my experience that I'm looking for. If you look at the second location, it's 6.2 miles. It takes me a little longer to drive. I know this doesn't seem like Southern California times. I'm sure it takes longer than 14 minutes to go 6.2 miles. But the ED waiting time is 5 minutes. And so therefore, I actually get to accomplish my mission, which is to see the doctor in a lot quicker time. I save time by going further away. So this is how data is driving personalized experiences in the care industry. So if you'll flip forward for me. The thing that's interesting about all this is there's really three big buckets of the way data is being managed. And I was kind of asked to work on how how operational analytics are being done in healthcare. I start off with this first piece, which is really running through KPIs and doing drill down capability and deeper dive. But the data you're looking at in this first segment of the slide is data that's not real time. It's data that's historical in nature. It could be antiquated it could be as old as 24 hours old. Like one of the major systems in healthcare is a healthcare system named Epic. And by the time you get to the reporting data, it's typically 24 hours old or up to 24 hours old. So this is really kind of a backward look. It's kind of like driving in the rearview mirror, if you would. And if you'll click forward for me, John. The next set of data we're talking about is more real-time data. This is data that I'm collecting up from sensors, information I'm getting from any kind of social media interaction, any kind of sentiment analysis that people are having about my organization. It's actually real-time analytics that are driven mostly by an ability to collect information very quickly, whether that be the digital dust that folks leave in the internet when they're out searching for things, or it be a sensor you're wearing, like maybe my Apple Watch. Maybe that gives it a look and feel and gives me real-time operational data. So, and then the last category is really a category John was talking a little bit about, and that's called predictive analytics. So if I know what's happened in the past and I've got some near-term results, how do I take all that data and build a model to basically predict what's going to happen? And so those are really the three big categories of what's going on in healthcare data. And then if you'll click forward one more time, John, one of the most important things is that we can't just have this data in an isolated spreadsheet or an isolated dashboard where we have to get on a screen to use it. We've got to make this data operational. We've got to make it really accessible and mobile. And so one of the things that Microsoft has done is our tools are all focused on producing dashboards like this, but also having a similar experience on a mobile device as you might have on a dashboard. There's other aspects to it, things like being able to use bots and those kinds of technologies once I found something to interact with folks and all that kind of stuff. But these are really kind of the major categories of how healthcare is looking at data and data analytics. And it's a market that's not nearly as mature as some other markets in the area. So if you'll flip forward for me, John, I'll shift gears to the drill down functionality, which is extremely important. You start with base data, you build it up to some really nice visualizations, but you got to be able to drill down. So in this example, I'm showing that one of the things that's happening to cause safety issues in one of the health systems is there's a lot of fractures going on. And what we ended up finding out is because a lot of people are using the stairs and indoor and outdoor stairways. And one of the main reasons for that is the elevators were broken. So they had to use the stairs and they would basically slip. There was actually a place where they would slip all the time and fall and we'd have fractures. And so you got to be able to drill into data and see what's really happening operationally. You can see that we have mapping capabilities, so we can monitor anything on a map and we can narrow in just like you would if you were trying to search for a place to go. And when you talk about drill down, you can look at the different cities, the different sources of inquiry, you have those tabs. And then another kind of fun little thing on the right-hand side is where we pull out of data through natural language processing some of the key phrases that people are using in association, and you can start to see the weight of those and how many of them there are. It's called a word graph. So if we'll go ahead and flip forward, the mobile interfaces are extremely important. I talked about this before. You got to give the same experience on a mobile device as you give in any other device, because let's be honest, everybody's gone mobile, and you know you're using your phone for everything. But the other thing that's interesting is when you go mobile is you can actually do things like put a bot in place, and you can start to do things like query the data quickly and easily. So here's a question I might have asked: why employee safety is an issue in Hawaii? And you know, through the analysis that we saw earlier, it could come back through a bot. It says, seems that the employees use an indoor stairway that is leading to a lot of fractures. It can drill us directly down into that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting in the ways you can communicate. So one of the things is getting into the dashboard, but the other thing is how do I actually interact directly with people in their workflow every day? So if you go forward for me, John. The other thing that's interesting is we can see that sensors can drive a lot of things. So in this example, in the Miami hospital, we actually had sensors on people and there were heat maps coming out of those, where those people were located in the facility. You could see where they were getting physically close to each other. This is actually a real situation that we generated during COVID to kind of track the patients and the people moving around in a center. If you'll flip forward for me. The other thing that's interesting is when you do this drill down, you really want to drive it toward care and healthcare. So we're trying to focus on getting all the information about a patient centered around that patient so that a care provider, as they're walking in the room or they're getting onto their televisit, has every piece of information they could possibly have around that patient. Now, we have long had technologies called electronic medical record systems in healthcare, and they do some of this type of reporting, but there's so many sources of data that are outside of that capability that we've got to pull in and we've got to be able to report on. And so you want to get to the point you get as complete a picture of a patient as you possibly can to really drive better care. So if you'll drive forward for me, John. The other thing that's interesting is we have these capabilities, we call them cognitive services or cognitive interfaces. An example of that is natural language processing, which can really make data usable. So what you see here on the left-hand side is a handwritten set of information that can be extracted using a thing called forms recognizer to basically come out with a JSON footprint of of what's in the form, what the form is, categorize it, and all kinds of things like that. I have a hospital that got caught by ransomware. What they had to do was basically write everything down, and they converted it into PDFs. And now what we're doing is we're basically pulling all those PDFs in. They took pictures and made them PDFs. We're pulling all those PDFs in. We're actually processing the data and actually putting it back into the EMR that was down for a period of time because they didn't want to pay the ransom to the organization that was charging them. So go ahead and go forward for me. This is a little look at how data might flow for these visualizations. So you'll notice the blue lines are more historical data. The first graph I showed up, the yellow lines are really more focused on real-time things. So wearables and medical devices and lab information and, Twitter feeds. I mean, it's fascinating what you can get out of social media in relationship to the care of an individual, because you're looking at the digital dust they're leaving around, and you can actually learn lots about them. And so this is just a little feel for the architecture that would drive something like this. And it's a specific architecture for Microsoft-based technologies, but you can plug and play other technologies in here. Oh, go ahead. Somebody was trying to say something. I just wanted to point out one other thing. There's some standards starting to happen in this industry, and the standard is called FHIR. The Fast Health Information Resource. This is really a standard that we've needed for years to actually drive commonality in the data and the data footprint, so that when we ask for information about a patient, about a doctor, we can get a common footprint no matter where you go. And so that's why that's center to our entire architecture here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Gwen to take us through some other other pieces of this material.
Hi, everyone. And I just want to say, following him, so my name is Lisa Gwynn, and he says that he's not in marketing. Just looking ahead at my slides, they're definitely not as nice as his. And I can say that as I'm actually his wife. So you can imagine we have quite a interesting outlook on life. He's from Microsoft and I'm from Oracle. I've been an Oracle program manager for quite some time. I've been with Oracle for over 20 plus years in various roles, engineering, application consulting, and the latest being the program management consulting. I've worked in a variety of industries, from semiconductor, aerospace, government, automotive, electronic commerce, manufacturing, etc. As this also says, I volunteer at several Phoenix nonprofits, listening to several of you talking about our wonderful Phoenix area. Yes, we're very pro not masks, I guess. But anyways, we have two children, 19 and 23. So that keeps both of us very busy in volunteering in these various organizations, and helping use our technology and our methodology and moving forward. And so I was asked, if you want to move forward, to sort of look at what are the different tool sets and what are the things that are involved in data analytics. And it's kind of funny, I always look at John as sort of the salesperson in our family, and I'm more of the operations person. So I believe in, I'm the one that comes in and rescues people when they've been sold the solution. And now how are we going to make this happen? What type of tool set are we going to use? And so just looking at data analytics, and from my viewpoint, I always look at what are the tools, what are the different technologies that are being used, and specifically in this area, right, I kind of focus on the platform, the data analytics platform versus the data analytic tools. So how do I define that? So from the perspective of the platform, specifically actually coming from Oracle, I'm looking at the hardware, right? The database and the software environment that are hosting the application and tools being used. So to me, the data analytic tools make up the applications that people use to mine the data, to analyze the data, to make all those wonderful assessments that were presented early on. Some of the solutions, I'm sure everybody knows, offer the end-to-end solutions, right? They offer the cloud-based solutions. Some are tailored for end user experience and flexible to support small to large types of analytics. Like I'm sure some people have heard the word Tableau, right? To me, that's more of a hands-on application, doesn't necessarily need a large platform. And you can see on the right, the Gartner kind of looks at the different aspects of what is it that drives the types of tools that you want to look at. And it depends on your organizational culture or what you're using the data analytics to do that will drive what types of platforms and tools that you're going to select. And so if we can move to the next slide. So some of the considerations, and I apologize, Price got printed twice and it should be actually on the right side. But anyway, so platform considerations, right? You're looking at just kind of like what type of volume are you going to have to be hosting and producing? Like what type of availability are you looking for? Is this going to be a platform that has to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Or is it something that can reside on my desktop and I can close every night, right? And that type of, that platform exists. You can use that. What type of response do I need? What type of performance wise, right? How fast do I need the data? How often do I need the data? What type of maintenance needs to be performed in order to support the organization or department or person who's using this? What type of pricing are we looking at? I think that goes without saying. And some offer, like mostly on the tool side, like some proof of technologies or proof of concepts, free trial runs, right? So looking for that type of offerings. Scalability, can it go and scale to my future growth? Those are things that you're looking at specifically on the platform side. And how hard is it to deploy, or how easy is it to deploy? You know, is it something that I can run off my laptop and I can quickly that I can add applications to my laptop or my platform with ease? Or is it going to have to take, you know, change control boards? That sort of thing is one of the types of things that you need to consider from a platform. Move to the next slide, please, John. Versus the tools, right? And it's easy to, like, they have a lot of common things that you need to consider, because tools, you also need to look at what types of volume of data that am I analyzing? What type of, again, the same sort of thing, what type of deployment am I facing when I'm trying to roll out this tool? What type of configurations are available to use with this tool? I mean, we have the data analytics aspect of it, but there are some certain things that you want to probably, depending on your organization and the implementation and the use, that you want to pre-standardize, you want to set up, you want to make it a standard across an organization or a department. Right? So you want to know, and all of that's driving your decision as to what tool you're selecting. Continuous innovation, right? You know, I think a lot of people sometimes forget that. They get caught up in the bells and whistles of a specific tool that exists now, but how engaged is that company that is supporting that tool? How are they looking forward to the future? Are they going to manage to be able to support future technologies that John was just actually explaining, like the natural language, right? The natural language processing. You know, if they're going to be able to support that, that tells you that that technology is probably supporting continuous innovation. And then, but at the same time that we're looking at continuous innovation, it leads to the next bullet, which is maturity. Because you certainly want to have, when you're looking at implementing a tool, you want to make sure that you have something that is mature, that is not what we call bleeding edge, unless you're willing to support that. But bleeding edge, I'm sure people have seen that when you get like a new release, quite often you end up with a lot of bugs, a lot of problems, because it is truly bleeding edge. But if you get a mature product, then odds are you're working with a product that has more stability. So it depends where you are. Again, the intent of the use of the tool as to what type or what level of maturity and how that rates in your selection process, right? And then the use of the tool, how easy is it to use? Right? Can anybody use it? Do you have, it's just like our phones, it's just like a laptop. You know, the whole thing about when I go and I get something new, is it something that I have to go through serious training, or is it something that I can quickly pick up? It's self-explanatory. But again, that depends on the level of complexity of the tool that you're trying to use, and also what you're using it for, which leads to the user interface, right? How easy is it to the display capabilities, the just every aspect of the user interaction and presenting the data, right? Is it matching? Is it configurable? Again, depending on the use of the tool. And then the connectors, the alerts, the et cetera, right? You know, one of the implementations that I did had heavy integration and interface requirements. And so when we looked at that, we had to figure out, is this tool going to be able to support that? Are they going to be able to manage APIs so that we don't have to make a lot of changes? Because some data analytic tools, right, have to pull in data from other places. It's not a single source. And so when you're looking at that, you have to see how easy is it to integrate into other platforms, other applications to provide the data that we're looking for. Go to the next page. So again, focusing on the data analytic tools, just looking at, you know, there's a variety of information out there that when you look at, there are so many analytic tools, there's so many options, there's so many different aspects of those different options that are available. And it's best to go look and take an assessment of what other companies, like Gartner, or this one was CRM, what ones are rated the best, right? It's just like buying anything in life. When you want to go buy something, especially something this important to you, you're going to want to go do your research to make sure that you are picking the best solution for the project that you're, or the analysis that you're trying to achieve. And so this was some of the top 10 analytics, right? The Rapid Miner, I mentioned Tableau already, Looker, Click, sorry, Sisense, Talend, Microsoft Power BI, Domo, ThruSpot, you know, and again, those are data analytic tools. Of course, being from Oracle, I wish Oracle would be up there, and I'm sure John would say, okay, well, he's got Microsoft Power BI, but you know, these are different tools or different analysis that's available for you to go look out on the internet and do your research. Go to the next slide. So, you know, going back to what I just said about, you know, my job is operations, right? I like to look at what is it going to take these platforms, to take these tools, how are we going to get them implemented into the environment that needs the use, right? And so part of that is looking at the processes that need to happen to support this through methodologies and procedures, right? Do we have standards? Is there things that we need to make? As I mentioned earlier, we're going to configure templates across the board, right? And that is not just about the tool, but it's also about the implementation process itself. Right. And then there's how are we going to roll this out? Because a lot of the data analytics and what I've seen in the past, it's not necessarily what they call a waterfall approach or the agile approach. I've actually seen a lot more use what we call the hybrid, and it's using this hybrid team management in order to kind of prototype. So you use like trying to walk through your requirements. As I mentioned, what is it out of the the considerations that you need to implement it. That kind of takes more of a thorough process of kind of the waterfall methodology, whereas the hybrid pulls in the fact that you can do some rapid type of concepts or releases to try to get the tool out there, make sure that you start building up to what it is at the end state. And then we've already touched about technology and trying to make sure that we pull in all the various aspects of technology, setting up the team norms and core values about what needs to happen with the team in order to adapt and adopt this data analytics mindset. And then coming up with, like, escalation processes when something's not necessarily happening that's leading you down the path of adopting this tool and change that you're trying to drive out. And then the baseline measurements, it's not just the end use of the tool, it's what is it that we're measuring against to make sure that this tool is being used successfully. So those are some of the things that you need to consider when you're going into adopting and adapting into a data analytics environment. And I think this will lead to now Shelley.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Bartow. Thank you, John. And thanks to everyone on the call. I'm very happy to be here. Today, I want to just introduce myself and then leave you with some tangible implementation considerations. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm Shelley Wright, and I join you from beautiful Southern California, where I live with my husband and 3 lovely dogs. My passion actually is teaching program and project management at 3 universities while implementing large, complex data analytics programs as a program management principal director at Kaiser Permanente. As a basis of reference, my last program was a $227 million, 300-person Kaiser Permanente board level approved 5-year, 8 petabytes of data, Epic Clarity electronic medical record data warehouse implementation on Oracle Exadata. Wow. If you are feeling overwhelmed hearing that, then you're in good company. It was truly exhausting, but it was successful. And today I bring you some additional tangible implementation considerations for your data projects from my learnings, more than what we've heard from the other speakers. Next slide, please. So our first consideration is to look at the 3 tenets. Those are people, partnerships, and politics. When we talk about people, we're specifically referring the project team members. Those are the people whose heart and soul are going into go into making the project happen. Politics references the nuances, the subtleties, the undertow that exists within your organization that can impede or cause your program success. Partnerships specifically relate to the relationships that you need to have in place to make the change, to make the movement to a data-first culture. Next slide, please. So what I love about this slide is it really focuses on the tenets of people. And as I mentioned, the people in this slide that we're referring to are the project team members. So when moving forward to building your team to implement a new data analytics project, if you're so fortunate to be able to select your team members, be sure to choose the right people and ensure that the role that you've placed them in is the right role for them. You're looking for people with a very diverse culture, a very diverse background, and who bring different thoughts to the table. In this current season, we are challenged with doing more with less staff. So some strategies to do that is to empower your people. Look for those that you can groom, that you can coach, that you can delegate to. By doing this, we can spread the load and we can accomplish more. One of my favorite sayings that I've adopted over the years is dispensation for all. Now let's fix this. So what's interesting about that is it's like, it doesn't matter how we got here, what the problem is. How do we fix this and how do we move forward and prevent it from happening again? It's not so much about critiquing the team, It's about coaching them and leading them. We realize that people make the difference. So we have to tailor our leadership strategy to the people. This can be done through many different ways. One person might appreciate a daily stand-up. One might want a weekly one-on-one. Whatever the approach that you take, maybe it's a morning coffee run when we get to go back to the office. Maybe it's an occasional lunch or meeting at the water cooler when we go back, or the instant message or text chat, right? Our focus as project managers, leaders, program managers, when it comes to the data analytics programs and projects, is to remove the roadblocks to enable our people to succeed, setting that core fundamental stage for success. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, projects do not happen on their own. And while we've talked about the project team members, that's only one component of our delivery model. The other is the partnerships. There are many different partnerships that we're going to talk about, but very briefly, you have partnerships with your vendors, with your peer organizations, with business, with the users, with your collaborative groups, with many different teams, maybe infrastructure, etc. So as we move forward, we start looking for those partners. We identify the influencers. On my last program, I had a very senior business partner, and it took a lot of discussion to get her to agree to be a part of the program. But she graciously did agree. 2 years into the program, she finally admitted to me the only reason she agreed to be a change agent and to partner with me on the program was because I continued to ask her, and it was the only way she could get me to go away. But it turned out to be the right thing to do. She was able to influence the program to help ensure her constituents, her users, her community's needs were met. I was able to gain a partner who was able to share with me the knowledge from the business side and how clinical data was going to be used that I didn't have on the IT side. This partnership proved to be invaluable, but it doesn't stop there. It only starts with our partnership with our business. The next is with our vendors. Our vendors can be our thought partners. They can be our advocates and help guide us, especially since they know the nuances of their platforms, their tools. So focus on setting common vision and priorities for your team and for your vendors. Look at what's in it for them, look at what's in it for the organization, and focus on building a relationship that's based on trust, collaboration, a common vision, and transparency. This same model works with our peer teams, whether they be across IT, whether they be in infrastructure, whether they be in the clinical setting. As you use these partnership skills, we can start establishing a protocol for moving forward as one team. The last nuance related to partnership that I want to touch on is healthy conflict. Recognize that there is a need for disagreement. Ideas and approaches can be debated. It's where you separate the people from the fact and come to a common solution. When we do this, we build and collaborate a one-team process, approach, one-team solution, a model where we have our project team members, our vendors, our business partners, our peers, all aligned to deliver our data analytics solution. Now let's talk about politics. And no, I'm not talking about any sort of election. Next slide, please. Projects inherently, by their definition, invoke change. Change brings some sort of response from those impacted. Implementing a data project seems to invoke an even more of an emotional response. People become totally yoinked when you say we're going to change platforms, we're going to implement a new tool. Questions like, what? What data? Who will own this data? How will it be supported? Why are we doing this now? All those questions clutter the discussion. It becomes a debate. These discussions bring people to a lower set point where they may say things like, that's been tried before and it will fail and it failed in the past. I remember sitting across from the table from one of my vendor partners after we explained our crazy idea, only to hear from them that that can never be done and it will fail. Our response was, we can do it, anything's possible, and eventually we did do it. But it took people who were willing to continue to operate in a higher set point and who continued to press against the politics. So how do we do that? Well, when working with politics that plague an organization, it's best to actively listen. Seek to understand the concerns, look to address them using a data-based approach. And what I mean is a fact-based approach. It's not about having a database. It's use logic, reason, come up with strategies and approaches to address the concerns. Focus on leveraging your relationships, the partnerships. I had an end user who was so opposed to implementing our data project that every time I met with her, she would say no. I could not move anything forward. I finally opted to meet with all of her directs separately, one-on-one. After meeting with each of them to gain agreement, I then met with her with all of them in the room. I shared that we all agreed this was the best approach and here's why. Finally, in front of her team, she finally agreed to move forward to the next step. We had to consistently do that for many milestones in that implementation to get us across the line. Lastly, the best strategy when working in a highly political environment is to focus on working with people and gaining their agreement through active listening, assuming positive intention and leveraging your relationships. Politics occurs for many reasons, from resistance to change, to building an empire, to whatever. But when focused on facts and on the win-win solution, you can navigate through that easily. In conclusion, by focusing on the 3 Ps, people, politics, partnership, you too can be successful in your data projects. Back to you, John.
Hi, that was excellent. Thank you guys all for those presentations. I'm going to turn on my video. So we're going to go through some guided Q&A. If anyone has any questions, Roger, should they put them in the chat? Is that where we'd like to accumulate them? Okay, I see a yes.
Yes,
So
please.
if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat and then we'll go through them certainly at the end. So let's start with John. So this is a question that I get asked a lot in my line of work, which is, I get asked, how much data do you need? But I'll ask you it differently for you. How do you draw the line between enough information versus too much information?
So that's a difficult line to draw, John. Basically what happens is you're focused on getting the maximum amount of data you can to perfect models, possibly, and you want to make sure that you don't drive bias into models that you're producing. So you want a wide set of data, particularly when it comes to healthcare data. You need to make sure you're covering populations that may not have been covered before. So a great example is I was just working with a organization that produces pulse oximeters. And one of the things that was not known when we started COVID, or wasn't very well known when we started COVID, is that the Black community, when they use a pulse oximeter, has a much lower reading than they should. And they actually were subjected to significantly different things during COVID because of that. And so we've got to overcome those kinds of issues. So you want a wide enough swath of data, particularly when you're talking about patients, to get a collection of various different characteristics in the population you're looking for, so you can narrow in. You can do analytics and reporting with very little data. I mean, in some of the operational things we're talking about, there's some very small data sets, but it's when you want to really get it to the point you can use that data for care delivery, those types of things, understanding whole populations, understanding how to know that this patient has something very similar to these other patients. You need to get an extremely wide data set and with a lot of variability in it.
Very cool. Yeah, I know in my line of work, I feel like all the time we hear, when do you have enough data? When do you have enough data? And the answer is always never.
Never, yeah.
Because there's always more to learn. The distribution's always changing. So I totally feel you in that regard. Lisa, I have fielded this question for, gosh, what year is it now? At least 7 or 8 years in my career. And so I'll pose it to you. What is the difference between a data lake and a data warehouse?
So it's funny. Yes, it's been one that you always have to face here. The data warehouse I like to start with, because a data warehouse has all of the, I want to call it a pre-structured environment, right? If you think of an actual warehouse, right, it's got everything lined up, already defined, et cetera, that you have a preset of rules around. Whereas a data lake is where you're just storing data. There's no rules, no structure, and the actual tool is putting the structure or implying the structure to the lake.
Very cool. Very cool.
Did I
very
get that right, Berto?
Yeah.
We have lots of discussion.
Yeah, data lakes weren't really popular until we got to the point that the technology could actually find things in the lake and assume structure and those types of things. That's why they're very popular now versus warehouses, where it takes time to heavily curate information and put it into the structured footprint. So
I would tend to agree. I know when I mine unsupervised data, it's near impossible without the right amount of compute and the right algorithm. So I totally agree with you on that. Shelley, I know that one of the things that I struggle with, and I have struggled with for many years, is getting buy-in on large and impactful organizations. And a strategy that I've used sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, is to be a benevolent dictator. How do you get buy-in on large and impactful organizational change?
While I would love to be able to say I've taken that approach, I can't. The organizations I've been in are highly collaboration to the point of consensus model driven, which can be very difficult to invoke change, especially when my last program, everyone said, I hate this and I don't want to do this. So how do you bring about change? Well, we focused on what they get and the benefit of it. When we brought and said, by doing this program, we can bring back to the organization more than $800 million in savings across 7 to 10 years. All of a sudden, people were like, really? And we can enable you to have these types of analytics tools. People were like, tell me more. So it did take a lot of getting leadership support and buy-in, doing a lot of roadshows, and then championing for the change by focusing on what's in it for them.
Interesting. Well, I'll stay there, because one of my favorite sayings I like to use in my line of work is disagree and commit. And I just stole that straight from Amazon. Do you find that effective, that methodology, or do you find that to be overly simplistic, or what are your 2 cents there?
I always believe no is an opportunity to get to yes. I don't take no very easily. And so it clearly is, I hear you, I hear the disagreement, I hear the no, but why? Explain to me. What's yoinking you? Let's dialogue. And then I want to remove, using logic, reason, fact, approach, process, all the roadblocks.
Very cool. Very cool. I'll jump back to Lisa. How important is learning the various tools? And when I think about learning data analytics tools, should I focus on more vendor specific implementations or vendor agnostic implementations, something like SQL, right? What do you think is a better use of one's time?
Well, and I really think that, again, I go back to, it depends on the person's perspective and what they're trying to use the tool for, right? I mean, each group or each person's going to take a different aspect of it, and depending on what you're trying to implement will determine what viewpoint you're looking for. I mean, I think it really depends. I don't have a straight answer for that.
Okay. All right. Very cool. John, I spent many years in healthcare. When I finished my doctorate in '09 and I started my own business, I kind of left in 13, kind of demoralized. The FDA didn't approve my machine learning project because it learned, which was mind blowing. So tell me something that excites you the most about healthcare and data analytics since then, and where's it going in the future?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, I'm sorry that that happened to you. I've been through those FDA clearance models. I understand what you mean. It learned, and
We
no
fought the 510K versus the PMA argument so many times.
there was no way to explain exactly how it learned, so you weren't going to get through that gate, right? So I get that. But I actually find that I was a CIO when it wasn't cool to be a CIO in healthcare, when they paid little, and there really wasn't a bunch of data analytics. And I would suggest to you that the market's changed quite a bit, because we didn't even have the tooling in place for a number of years in healthcare to actually capture data to point of transaction. It wasn't until Obamacare came along, or with the Obama administration, where we basically regulated the need for certified EMRs. That was the first time we actually created a collection point for transactional data. Up until that time, 95% of all the data was handwritten and was basically shoved into manila envelopes. And how are you going to process that, right? So I think there's a world of maturity that's probably happened since you left the model. But I do think we're on the brink of significant maturity that's going to occur. And the marketplace itself right now in healthcare is starting to get influenced by a couple major things. Number one, there are standards that are being regulated by the government to use technologies, like I mentioned before, like FHIR and those types of things, and make that the standard for the industry to evolve around. Similar to the way financial industries have a common standard on how they transact business between ATMs and other players and stuff. That's what FHIR is meant to be in this space. And so we're starting to see a strong push toward that. I mean, it's being regulated directly by the federal government. You will be penalized if you don't offer your knowledge of a patient in a FHIR-based protocol, if you don't offer your capabilities from a physician footprint in a FHIR-based protocol. So those things are starting to be regulated. That's number one. Number two, and I think this is probably more of a driving force than the regulation that's occurring. The second thing that's happening is consumers are actually getting experiences in other industries that they really like. Think about it. You use your cell phone to travel, you interact on social media. You've got all these experiences coming at you as a consumer that in other industries, they're really fresh and new and easy to learn, and you take advantage of. No one teaches you how to do it. Someone says, hey, have you seen this app? You get the app down, you start playing with it, all that kind of stuff. That stuff needs to start coming toward healthcare, and the consumer demand that's starting to occur in the healthcare industry is starting to reshape the industry. There's a lot of venture money that's going into healthcare that's just basically backing startups that, in some sense are starting to cannibalize the business of the traditional provider and payer. A great example there is no one thought people would pay out of their pocket for an ability to do a virtual visit. Well, Teladoc came along and they until recently, never accepted insurance. Basically, if you wanted to see a doctor, you paid $35 out of your own pocket. And guess what? The convenience of that drove a consumer society to say, I really love this experience and I'm willing to pay for it. And it made that one of the leading telehealth platforms in the universe. Again, a venture-backed startup that used consumerization as their lead into the model. And so data and analytics are going to become extremely important to surviving and thriving in the healthcare industry. And, it's only going to get more and more that way as we go forward. And that's not even talking about clinical evolution of analytics. I mean, it's fascinating what we're doing in the image analytics space, those types of things. So John, sorry, maybe you should take it back again. Maybe you'd get a different response. I don't know what your product was, but but they are loosening up a little bit from a regulatory perspective on what they're allowed to approve.
I'll tell you, I was doing machine learning and radiation oncology. So finding regions of interest in mass cancer and pre-op mass cancer. We focus on prostate.
Yep.
And I still remember being like, hey, the model's going to produce slightly different segmentations between 2 days as it learns. And the FDA saying, no, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult to have them. This thing can learn by observation and struggle with that. So
So Lisa, John talked about some of the data analytics tools in healthcare. What are the most data analytics tools used currently kind of everywhere?
Well, actually, it's kind of funny, and I deliberately love this question because it's actually one of my favorite. You would not believe that what I consider the most used data analytics tool is Excel. And and it is so widely, like if you think about everything that you can do with Excel and how many people use Excel, they're basically doing data analytics with Excel. And so, and of course, Barto loves that because it's Microsoft, but you know, I won't give that to him. Well, I will give him that one. But anyway, so, you know, I really highly depend on it. And I would say that, you know, people don't think about the fact that it's really a data analytics tool.
I couldn't agree more. Even though I consider myself a data scientist, I use Excel probably as the most widely used graphing software in my arsenal, right?
Well,
so I couldn't agree more.
John, can I add something to that? It's a popular tool when every time someone evaluates an analytics tool, they want to know, can I import from Excel and can I extract to Excel? You know, it's a valuable tool at that point, right?
I've seen, yeah, I would say I've seen startups that's their whole business model, and they've raised venture capital based on IO to Excel, like efficient IO to Excel. So totally agree. Shelley, let's pivot a little bit. You had talked about the 3 Ps in your presentation. Which would you consider the most important of them?
Hands down, that's the people. You have to have, like you alluded to, John, in your presentation, the right mix of people. The people make the difference. It's not, you know, having just a body that knows how to use a tool. If they can't interpret the data, set up the data, do the mapping, or even triage why things are not aligned, it's just not going to work. So you have to have the right people.
Even in today's climate, it's not the politics?
No, I'm sorry. It's all the people. It's about the people, and the people make the difference. And that's why I feel it's the most important thing. Because if you have the right people, the politics are easy, because then they can build the relationships. And once you have the relationships, you can navigate the politics, and then you can work the process. It all, you know, it's the team, right?
Well, when we think about the 3 Ps, what would you say is the easiest portion to do, right? You talked about kind of most important, but what's the easiest?
For me, and mind you, I'm a people person. I love people. So that partnership is the easiest part, right? That's the simplest element of it. Building the relationships, it's the most underrated. Just like we network for a job, just like we network for you know, information, you network for partnerships, and those partnerships can actually help you even if you don't think they're going to. For example, I needed to get approval from a data warehouse owner in Georgia. This person completely ignored my entire team. I am a $227 million board approved program, and he would not give us the time of day. But one of his staff members absolutely adored working with me on another project. And so we went to her, and she went to her boss, and the next thing we knew, we had his agreement. That's why I say the partnership coupled with the people make the difference.
Very cool, very cool. Lisa, I want to get down and dirty. When we talk about data tools, what's better? Oracle, Teradata, Azure, SQL Server? I use Domo at my job. Like, what do you like the best there?
Answer this one right.
I'm going to answer it exactly like I kind of answered the earlier one, and it's because I'm a consultant, right? It depends. I think that is got to be my favorite word, especially in this case. And every situation will drive you towards a different solution. And I know that I could probably get into so many arguments with my spouse there about which one's the better one. Obviously, he's going to push Microsoft. I'm going to push Oracle. And You know, I like replacing Teradata, you know, and so again, it depends on all the things that I went through about the consideration of volume, availability, maturity, end-to-end solution, you know, configurability, right? All of that will drive what is the right platform for you.
Could you maybe give us a scenario where you did an analysis between 2, 3, 4, however many of these, and chose one for reasons, just so we can kind of like feel what that looks like?
Well, I think and just do realize I am not in the business development or sales area of that. But typically, again, I think it goes back to the application that you're trying to use. One of the things that we did was there was an application that was not certified on a platform. And so, it had been, but was no longer. And so we had to go through and figure out what platforms was that application going to be certified on now and in the future, right? Were they going to be supported going forward so that future releases for the data analytics tool would be supported going forward, and they could take advantage of that technology. But at the same time, so that was the primary driver, but then the next driver was how easy would it be able to implement that on that particular tool, right? And how much would it cost? What was the cost of maintenance? So those are the things that we went through and looked at the different platforms to assess whether or not which one would be correct. And you got to remember, right? I'm selling, or I'm on the part of being purchased. So this is somebody else assessing us, not necessarily, right? I'm not doing the assessment. If that makes sense.
Totally fair. Totally fair. So I actually, John, I have a friend of mine who I went to graduate school with who did some work in data analytics around COVID. I didn't get too deep into the weeds on it, but could you talk about how data played a role in the recent pandemic and maybe what went well, given the data state of the world, and what we could have done better, given tooling?
Sure. So I don't know if you know this, but Microsoft was a driving force behind the model that Johns Hopkins put out, where we were actually tracking statistically as the pandemic went up and those types of things. The struggle there was there was a lot of predictive capability that we built with some other partners that never got displayed during the pandemic, but it would actually help predict a lot of the surge and those types of things. We found them to be pretty accurate, but it was tough to know that they were accurate until after the surge occurred and those types of things. So not having, like the last pandemic we really had was back in 1918, not having a data footprint to know whether these models were good enough or not, led us to not, guide people in that way. But we did see some very interesting usages. Like I will explain that in St. Louis, there's a couple of health systems out there that we collectively work together with to basically build dashboards for the school systems to determine when they were going to bring students back and out of school. And it went all the way down to the defining point of what street did the child live on, what's the likelihood of a condition occurring if they go back to school or not. And we were actually guiding models through that process. So we saw some very interesting things there. But then on the other side of the conversation, what we found was extremely interesting is this whole surge that was hitting the health system. We were able to actually offset that surge by using conversational analytics behind a bot to do basic triage for all these people that thought they might have COVID to determine if they did or didn't, and then channel them effectively. In fact, that got so popular, we built a technology called the Health Bot, which was using this conversational analytics. And it got so popular that the CDC put it on their website, and it became the steering mechanism for all the people in the United States around, COVID and stuff. It's now deployed at over 1,400 locations throughout the world. And then the last effect I'll talk about of COVID is we never could have produced a vaccine in the speed and time that we have without having used a huge amount of analytics. So it was collecting the data on the populations, understanding the disease, getting that pretty little picture of coronavirus that we all see with the little red spikes and things, learning that the way that it attaches is from those spikes to an enzyme that basically allows it to affect our body, which led us to different therapies than we've ever had in vaccination models, right? And so There are multiple different vaccines out there. You discussed a few of those at the beginning of this. There's the Pfizer and the Moderna. Those are coming from a brand new technology in the marketplace called T cell modeling, right? And we were able to get enough data around T cells to model that this was the receptor. Being able to cause the enzyme not to attach to the receptor would allow a person not to catch or not to become infected. Others are still on an older version, like the Johnson & Johnson. It does use a dead form of the virus to basically create your immune model. But, you know, without analytics, we could have never gotten to the place that we produced a vaccine in 18 months and started putting it in millions of people's arms. And even that, putting in millions of people's arms, we need a lot of analytics to do that. How are you going to, you know, how are you going to manage getting people in for shots? You know, I don't know. Everybody here mostly said they had a shot. I don't know how frustrating it was to try to line that up. But if we didn't have a bunch of analytics driving behind that, it would have been a massive amount more frustrating than it was. So just tons of goodness came out of the analytics in the COVID space.
Awesome, very cool. Well, although we have more questions, I do want to leave time for audience questions. So I kind of want to open it up for general Q&A from the audience. I see one about fire in particular, and I think we talked about that. John, do you have anything else to add for that one in the chat?
Questions. Is it a stable protocol? It is a stable protocol. It doesn't include everything yet. It's an expanding protocol. The whole industry is focused on it. It's regulated, as I said. And then you said mentioned JSON. Does it also include metadata? The actual standard FHIR model is about tagging information in healthcare into these things we call resources. A resource is the metadata label that goes on things. So a great example is, you know, a patient is a resource. An encounter is a resource with a metadata layer on it. And so what you do is you get everything that you need from a resourcing perspective assembled around an individual patient. You can draw a complete longitudinal record for what happened with that patient. And there's some very interesting things going on. Like now we're taking medical images and we're taking the DICOM headers out of those and pushing those into FHIR as well. So now you can go directly into the images. You can go into all the lab tests. So it's a maturing standard. It does have a massive amount of metadata. It's an open standard, so people are contributing to it. Our first FHIR server we put out was an open source server. You can still run that. But we've also done it in an API fashion. So you can basically just call an API and we'll manage the standards behind all of it. So yeah, it's a great movement forward for the industry.
Very cool.
Thank you for that, John. This is Swami. Thank you very much for your answer. It was detailed.
You're welcome.
Any other audience questions?
I have one that's only indirectly related. About mapping the human genome. That's probably a data science problem. Where are we at in terms of getting it down to like $100?
Oh, we're getting pretty close to that.
Yeah.
You know, it's fascinating. We went into the human genome business, I'm going to say 5 years ago, and one of the major models there's many different pipelines for the genome. So, you know, the way genome is sequenced is you have this thing called a sequencer. You buy them from large corporations, and basically Illumina is an example, right? So you take a sample from a human, you put it in the sequencer, and it basically comes out with these files. The files then are processed against a standard genomic model that we built. I don't know if you remember years ago, there was a model, there was a drive to build, you know, a map for the human genome. And it was supposed to take 20 years, 8 years into it, nothing had been progressed. 12 years into it, nothing had been progressed. But here's the thing that's interesting, because data science and data modeling is accumulative. In the next 3 years, they accomplished what they were trying to do after that 15 years of not looking like there's much progress, but it was basically they were building the understructure to it. And we basically got to it 5 years earlier than we thought we were going to. That gave us the model for a genome. What we do then with those samples and those files that come out of a sequencer is we compare it to the model of a human genome and we call variants. And that's where the real trigger is where are your variants? And that will give us, that leads to Is somebody, susceptible to heart disease? Is someone susceptible? We've all heard about the, looking at the SNP that's responsible for breast cancer and things like that. That's where the promise of it is. But the actual speed of processing it has come down quite drastically in the cloud-based models. We produced a model 4 years ago that was 7 times faster than anybody else in the industry. We're very nearing the $100 mark. And when we get to quantum computing, which is a whole nother leap in computing speed, I suggest we'll be well under $100 mark. So it's getting close, Roger. It's there are places you could find that would do it now, probably more phenotyping, not full genome, for for $80, $90, right? But that's not full genome. That's phenotyping. So
That's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I've heard that you can now just. I heard Kathy. Let me see, Kathy Woods, the kind of the head of the ARC Innovation Funds.
Yep.
Talk about the fact that you can detect variations. It would kind of it's slowly becoming like part of your annual physical.
Yeah.
And you can detect variations and predict things that are not yet problems.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's fascinating, I don't know if you've heard of them. There's a healthcare payer firm, and I'm going to forget the name of them. They come out of New York. I apologize for forgetting the name. That's probably the gene that says I'm getting old. But they basically have swept through the marketplace, and they're taking paying members from other payers into their model, because one of the benefits they have, and they're targeting the 30 and under population, the healthy 30 or under population. One of the things they offer you if you become a member, it's named Oscar. I got it. It's named Oscar. Sorry about that. But if you become a member, to attract members, they're actually giving you a free genome sequencing, right? So they're going to run your full genome. And there's people that thought that everybody would be sketch about having their genome, modeled like that, be used. These younger generations, they love it, right? They're like, that's what I want. I want to make sure I know everything I can know. And if somebody's going to give that to me, that's a great benefit. So Oscar's using it as an attraction vehicle for people to join their plan, and it's being extremely successful.
Interesting.
The other part of your question though, Roger, is I would say in genome, it's not as much about the cost. Yeah, that'll become a big component of it, but it's also the speed at which you can do it. Because the problem you have is if someone gets admitted to a hospital today, let's say they came in through the emergency room and I took a sample of some sort and I went to process that through a genomic model, it's going to be 48, 72, maybe even longer number of hours. I'm not being able to use that data in the care of that patient. So we got to really speed that up, right? And it's come down a long way. It used to take a week and a half or 2 weeks, right? Now it's come down a long way, but we've got to speed it up so we could take a sample, and pretty quickly after that, we could basically use that data in their care planning, right? And when quantum computing comes along, that speed model will be definitely taken care of.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Cool.
So are there any other questions from the audience?
Yes, this is Swami again. Any of the panelists, because you've all addressed different parts of this. We deploy predictive models into businesses. And one of the difficulties we have is, obviously prediction comes with risk.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you, number one, the models are all extremely abstract. How do you explain that to business people? Which gets into the John and John discussion from before. And the other is, how do you detect when, how do you quantify risk and set the expectations so that people don't think of this as an oracle, but as a, smart person in the conference room, and, use that input, but wisely. Any experience, either technologically or through process, to address that?
Sure, I'll jump in first on that one, because you said a couple of buzzwords, at least for me. So explainable ML or interpretable ML is actually a very uh, it's a very hot issue right now in academia. If you attend NeurIPS or ICML or CVPR or iClear or whatnot, these are like the top academic conferences in the world. You'll always find tracks, if not full sessions, on interpretable ML. My 2 cents, I hate it. And I'll be very transparent with why I hate it, because I think it's akin to saying, hey, Swami, why did your brain decide to make this decision? Explain to me why your brain made this decision. You can't do it, right? It's because you've amassed years and years of experience and learning, and that's the decision you made, right? Instead, in my opinion, the right answer to ask is, how do I know that you get the right answer enough? Right. And so this is where, I'm clearly not a classical statistician in this regard, right? And a classical statistician would yell at me for having this opinion. But my intuition is that I would rather give you a model that is maybe you can't understand it, but gives you the right answer more often than a model that you're like, oh, I really get it. It's linear regression. I totally understand it, but it's not right very often. Like that's the trade-off you usually have with interpretable ML. And gosh, unless there's some governing body, like unfortunately healthcare, or finance, that forces you to have interpretable ML, right? I would always steer away from it. As far as how do you understand risk, I found real-world scenarios to always be the best, and I always love to talk in terms of extremes. So I'll give you an idea. In my domain, right, we do with advertising. And I've had clients come to me and say, John, I cannot have my ad show in front of a bad video. And I said, okay, we're going to put 10 million videos in your campaign and we can't have even one. I said, okay, great. Then you shouldn't advertise. There's just no way I can guarantee that you're not going to be in front of one bad video. And so that's basically the risk then becomes the risk of inaction. Right? Because everyone always considers the risk of action, right? But there's a risk of inaction. Do you really want to not advertise and not sell any products? If your position is, I cannot have one mistake, that's my advice to you, right? So taking these logical extremes to me has really helped in my career, because you can put people in this position where they obviously have to give an answer, and then you can kind of back them down into some reasonableness standard that everyone can agree on. But I mean, other people feel free to disagree with me.
I would say, Swami, in response to your message, we get this question all the time in healthcare. The question is AI going to replace a doctor? Right? That's the question we hear all the time. And, you can show evidence of how AI is better at things than a doctor, and then the doctor still intuitively will not believe it. Right? And so getting adoption is difficult. But what happens over time is that there will be a few people in the organization that will grab onto it. They'll demonstrate great success. It'll actually start to show its way. And then finally that doctor will start to listen to it, right? And it's, I say it this way, and I heard this from someone, I don't remember who it was. I don't think AI is going to replace doctors, but I do really believe that doctors that use AI are going to replace doctors that don't. Right at the end of the day. And some of that's going to have to be, we're going to have to become comfortable with it, right? We have to make sure we take all the bias out of everything. And, we've got to work on what we call ethical AI at Microsoft, and be very focused on that to kind of gather their trust. I will speak from a corporate perspective, not a healthcare perspective. Analytics and AI has completely transformed Microsoft from a company that once sold packaged products to a company now that's helping organizations in so many different ways that it's tough to even believe what we're doing now. That was all done because we used data to determine which direction we should go. Just like the slide I showed you with me on it, driven by data, right? And it's become a culture. There's a cultural aspect to it, and you got to drive that culture. And, there are people that'll believe, there are people that won't believe. And it's good to have people arguing about that a little bit, because some of these, unethical AI uses we've got to overcome those. But, it'll never be 100% proven, in my mind, in anything. But as long as the risk factor is much less if I'm using AI than if I'm not using it, I'd rather do that. Right? That's the way I look at it.
So was that a reasonably good answer for you?
Yes, I mean, you know, absolutely. I mean, I understand. I was hoping for a people perspective from Shelley. You know, how do you work with people in these squishy areas where they've got an expectation that you didn't know they had, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, but I thought you promised this, and now you're telling me it'll actually be wrong in 10% of the cases.
See, I don't have that problem, and that's because I use a lot of prototyping, and I use a lot of discussion. So it's really about building tangible, small little outputs and putting it in front of them and saying these are the risks. And I really actually use a lot of what John and John mentioned, which is, you know, what is the return on the investment? And what I mean by that is inaction, non-adoption, staying stagnant has a cost to it. Like there's a return on investment for joy. If it takes you more energy to go to halfway around the world for vacation and you get stuck there and you're stranded for 3 weeks, do you have a lot of joy for that vacation versus just going to the neighborhood park, right? So I think if we use smart processes like prototyping, like discussions and dialoguing and accepting the risks and riffing or talking about what that real return is, it really closes the gap for adoption and helps us move forward.
Thank you.
It's also about understanding what's driving your target audience, right? Or know your audience is what I always say. Make sure you know what's driving them. Yeah.
Yeah, or know how to influence them. There's something they want. How do you get that for them to help us all move forward?
Or what they don't want.
All right.
So Roger, any other questions for today?
That's the questions. Does anyone have any more questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
What's for dinner, Lisa?
You know the answer.
Thank you so much.
I'm
This
sorry,
has been
guys,
a great dialogue.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had one very generic thing about getting the contact information and the slide deck. Is that possible for the panels?
We will be asking the panel for permission to post it on our website. Absolutely.
Okay, thank
Hopefully they'll agree.
you. No problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much for making this a highly entertaining evening, every one of you. We appreciate it. It's probably one of our most stimulating discussions and very very transformative information. So thanks very much. Well, thanks, John. Thanks, Shelley. Thanks, John. And thank you, Lisa.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.